Hey everyone, my name's Mark. I've always loved music, especially old blues records. There's something raw and haunting about them. I've spent years building my collection, hunting down rare and obscure records. I never thought my passion would lead to something so terrifying, but here I am, writing this to warn others. It all started one Saturday afternoon at a local flea market. I was browsing through a stall filled with old vinyl, about to leave when something caught my eye. An old, dusty record with no label. The stall owner noticed my interest and came over. "That's a rare one," he said, his voice low. "Belongs to an obscure blues musician named Robert Blackwell. Not many copies were pressed." I'd never heard of Blackwell, but I was intrigued. I asked how much, and the owner gave me a sly smile. $20, and it's yours." I handed over the cash and took the record home, excited to give it a listen. I carefully placed it on my turntable and lowered the needle. The room filled with the crackling sound of the vinyl, followed by a slow, mournful guitar. Blackwell's voice was deep and gravelly, singing about pain and sorrow. It was mesmerizing. I woke up the next morning feeling uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I brushed it off as leftover tension from a creepy movie I'd watched the night before. I went about my day, running errands and meeting up with friends. That night, I decided to listen to the record again. As Blackwell's voice filled the room, I felt a strange chill. The shadows in the corners of my apartment seemed to grow darker and more menacing. I told myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't ignore the sense of dread that settled over me. I went to bed but couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard whispers, faint and unintelligible. I tossed and turned, trying to block them out, but they only grew louder. Finally, I got up and walked around my apartment, checking every corner. Nothing was out of place, but the whispers continued, persistent and eerie. The next day, I was exhausted. I went to work, barely able to focus. My boss noticed and asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was just tired, which was technically true. I couldn't tell him about the whispers. He'd think I was crazy. When I got home, I stared at the record sitting on my shelf. Part of me wanted to play it again, to see if I could figure out what was happening. The other part of me was terrified of what I might find. I gave in to curiosity and placed the record on the turntable. As soon as the music started, the air in the room grew heavy. Blackwell's voice seemed to echo, filling the space with an unnatural resonance. The shadows lengthened, and I saw shapes moving within them. Suddenly, a vision flashed before my eyes. I was standing in a dark, endless void, surrounded by twisted, grotesque figures. They whispered my name, their voices dripping with malice. I stumbled back, ripping the needle off the record. The vision vanished, and I was back in my apartment, heart pounding. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those figures, heard those whispers. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. I decided to research Robert Blackwell, hoping to find some answers. I spent hours online, digging through old articles and forums. Finally, I found something. A small, obscure blog post about Blackwell's life. According to the post, Blackwell was rumored to have made a deal with the devil, trading his soul for musical talent. It was said that his music had the power to summon dark forces. I felt a chill run down my spine. Could it be true? Was the record cursed? I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore what was happening. That night, I decided to stay at a friend's place. Maybe some distance from the record would help. My friend Jake was happy to have me over. We watched movies and tried to relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. In the middle of the night, I woke up to find Jake standing over me, his eyes wide and unseeing. "Jake?" I whispered, fear creeping into my voice. He didn't respond. Instead, he began to speak in a low, guttural voice that wasn't his own. "You cannot escape. The fears are yours. They belong to you." I scrambled away from him, heart racing. Suddenly, he snapped out of it, looking confused. "Mark? What's going on?" I didn't know how to explain, but I had to get out of there. I left Jake's place, driving aimlessly until I found myself back at my apartment. The record seemed to call to me, its presence a dark cloud over my mind. Desperate, I decided to confront whatever was in the record. I placed it on the turntable once more, determined to face my fears. As the music played, the shadows deepened, and the room grew cold. The figures appeared again, but this time I didn't turn away. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice shaking. They didn't answer with words. Instead, they showed me visions of my deepest fears. Losing my loved ones, dying alone, being consumed by darkness. The images were so vivid, so real, that I could hardly tell where reality ended and the nightmare began. Enough. I screamed, tearing the needle from the record. The music stopped, but the figures remained. They reached out to me, their touch cold and painful. I fell to my knees, feeling my sanity slip away. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The figures vanished, and I was alone in my apartment, the record silent. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the record. Eventually, I got up and threw it into a box, determined to get rid of it. I took it to the local dump, hoping that would be the end of it. Life slowly returned to normal, but I was never the same. The nightmares continued, though they were less frequent. I couldn't listen to music without feeling a sense of dread. I stopped collecting records, afraid of what else might be lurking in those old grooves. I told my friends some of what happened, but they didn't believe me. They thought it was a joke or a symptom of stress. I stopped trying to convince them. I knew the truth, and that was enough. Months later, I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was the record. My heart sank as I stared at it. There was no escaping it. The fears, the darkness, it was all tied to me, bound by that cursed music. I couldn't believe it. How had the record found its way back to me? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some kind of prank. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The record's presence was like a dark cloud hanging over me, its weight almost suffocating. That night, I sat in my living room, staring at the box. I thought about all the things I had learned about Robert Blackwell and his supposed deal with the devil. Was this some kind of twisted retribution? Had I unknowingly unleashed something far beyond my understanding? Sleep was impossible. Every creak and groan of my apartment felt magnified, like the walls were closing in on me. I needed to know more. I couldn't just sit here, waiting for the next wave of terror. So, I decided to do something I had never done before. I reached out to someone who might understand. There was an old record shop downtown, run by a guy named Ed. He was a bit of a recluse, but he knew everything there was to know about old music, especially blues. I figured if anyone could help me, it would be him. The next morning, I took the record and headed to Ed's shop. The place was a mess, with stacks of vinyl and old music posters covering every inch of space. Ed was behind the counter, peering at me through thick glasses. "What brings you here, kid?" he asked, his voice gruff. I pulled the record out of the box and placed it on the counter. "I need your help. This record, it's doing something to me." Ed's eyes widened when he saw the record. He picked it up carefully, examining it. "Where did you get this?" I told him the story about the flea market, the strange stall owner, and everything that had happened since. Ed listened, nodding occasionally. "This is a cursed record," he said finally, placing it back on the counter. Blackwell was a notorious blues musician, but his talent came at a price. He was said to have made a pact with dark forces. His music has power, terrible power. I shivered. So what can I do? How do I stop it? Ed sighed, rubbing his temples. "There's no easy answer, kid. Destroying it might not be enough. The curse is tied to you now. You have to face it, confront whatever it is that the record has unleashed." His words echoed in my mind as I left the shop. Confront it. How was I supposed to do that? The visions, the whispers, they were all in my head, weren't they? Back home, I paced my apartment, trying to muster the courage to play the record one last time. I needed to end this, to break free from the nightmare. With trembling hands, I placed the record on the turntable and lowered the needle. The familiar crackle of the vinyl filled the room, followed by Blackwell's haunting guitar. The air grew heavy, and the shadows lengthened. I steeled myself, ready for whatever was to come. The figures emerged from the darkness, their whispers filling my mind. This time, I didn't turn away. I faced them, letting the visions wash over me. My deepest fears played out before my eyes, losing my loved ones, dying alone, being consumed by darkness. The images were so vivid, so real, that I could hardly tell where reality ended and the nightmare began. But I didn't falter. I stood my ground, forcing myself to confront each fear head-on. "You don't control me," I whispered, my voice shaking but determined. "I won't let you win." The figures seemed to hesitate, their forms flickering. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, but I held firm. Slowly, the visions began to fade, the shadows receding. The air lightened, and the oppressive weight lifted. When the music finally stopped, I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but victorious. The record sat on the turntable, silent and unthreatening. I knew that I had faced my fears and won, but the experience had changed me forever. I took the record and locked it away in a safe place, determined never to let it see the light of day again. Life slowly returned to normal, but I was never the same. The nightmares continued, though they were less frequent. I couldn't listen to music without feeling a sense of dread. I stopped collecting records, afraid of what else might be lurking in those old grooves. Months later, I received another package in the mail with no return address. My heart sank as I opened it, but to my relief, it wasn't the record. Instead, it was a letter. "Mark, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to reach out and let you know that you're not alone. There are others who have faced similar curses, who have survived the darkness. If you ever need to talk, or if you need help, please don't hesitate to reach out. Take care, Ed." I held the letter close, grateful for the connection. Knowing that there were others out there who understood, who had faced their own demons, gave me a sense of comfort. I wasn't alone in this. The record remained locked away, a reminder of the darkness I had faced and the strength I had found within myself. I moved on with my life, cautiously, always aware of the shadows but no longer controlled by them. And so, I write this to warn others. If you ever come across a record by Robert Blackwell, leave it alone. Don't listen to it. Some music is meant to stay silent. But if you do find yourself caught in its grip, know that you're not alone. Face your fears, confront the darkness, and you can break free.